Okay, friends, as promised, here is our first discussion of the literature response model. And we'll start with a brief overview of the 5 levels of response, and then we'll dive into the first level, the factual level. So let's go. Let's begin with the big picture. This response model is recursive in the same way that we talk about the writing process as recursive. In other words, it's presented in a linear fashion, although it's always doubling back on itself. The one exception is as you first enter into the literary text. For that early part of your instruction, it's suggested that you go level 1, level 2, level 3, once through before you double back. And I think the reason why will become apparent as we progress through the 5 levels of response. And here they are. At level 1, or the factual level, assignments address surface level content in order to ensure that students are ready for higher order activities. In other words, we make sure that they have been able to read and been able to make sense of the most fundamental surface level content. Next, operating from the premise that the more students can connect with a text, the more carefully they will read or think about the text, level 2, or the empathetic sympathetic level, seeks to create a personal connection between the student and various aspects of the course content. At level 3, or the analytical level, the response model supports the kind of discipline-specific critical analysis that students often dislike. However, because we're confident that students have been reading, level 1, and because students have a personal stake in the material, level 2, analysis becomes a tool for understanding better what they have read. This third level also offers students a method or a vocabulary for sharing their interpretations. It welcomes them into the discourse community that is literary study. At the next level, level 4, I departed from Brown's original model. She had level 2 as empathetic and level 4 as sympathetic. However, I believe that critical literacy demands that students move beyond their familiar world to considering larger, even abstract issues and events beyond their ken. If our goal as teachers is to expose students to this larger, more complex, and unfamiliar world as part of a program that nurtures resistance and encourages both opposition and action, then we need to guide students toward a global perspective and a consideration of how texts reflect abstract laws or contemporary social political realities. Given these concerns, I devised the level where students recognize that what they learn in the parochial world of the classroom can help them understand, interrogate, and even affect a larger world. To this end, I ask students to examine a text at what I call the applicative level, whereby they apply what they have learned from their reading to the world outside both the text and their immediate experience. In this way, students move from a local to a global perspective. By the 5th level, and the final level of the model, the critical level, students are well prepared to assess the value of the material they've been studying. Here, they're asked to make judgments about a work and projections about its value and worth. The nature of this evaluation changes, however, when students are encouraged to consider how the knowledge they have gained can be applied. Course content is judged not by its intrinsic, but as well for its extrinsic value. That is, the degree to which content encourages students to create knowledge, challenges dominant ideology, and allows for multiple readings. In case you were curious, and I think I mentioned this earlier, Brown is a student of Rosenblatt, and you can see from this chart exactly how. See, what's so appealing about this modified model is that by combining cognitive and affective responses, it allows teachers to fulfill both the quote-unquote canonical requirements of the literature classroom, that is the stuff we do at the analytical level, as well as encouraging a student-centered approach that reveals to readers how literature examines, challenges, or reinforces particular ideologies. Further, while the response model suggests a framework for approaching a text, it does not dictate pedagogy. Sounds a lot like the Common Core standards, right? By introducing teachers to this model for response, what I hope to encourage is the creation of these kinds of laboratories for social justice that are advocated by critical pedagogues. So here you see that at the factual level, the focus is cognitive skills. At the empathetic or sympathetic level, the focus are the affective skills. We want to get our students' hearts into the text. We know they're figuring out what's going on in the text because we've assessed their factual understanding. We know they're following the plot. They're making sense of what they're reading at the most surface level. But at the empathetic level, we're cultivating their personal connection. Then we move on to the analytical level where we begin to examine a text from all of those literary perspectives. This is where we begin to teach the language of literary study. Once we've gotten them fully into the text, we ask them to think beyond what they're reading to the larger world. So we ask them to put their head and their heart into an examination of what they've learned from this text that they can apply as they examine a larger world. And then, based on all those experiences, we ask them to judge the text, both as a document for its aesthetic elements, but also for the things they can carry away, the efferent side of reading. So let's dig into level 1, our first level of understanding. Here, students simply relate the facts of a work. They demonstrate basic understanding and comprehension. It's a purely cognitive interaction with the text. It responds to the questions, how can we make sure that students are reading and understanding what they read? If they don't understand what the words on the page are saying, that basic comprehension we talked about in the reading video, then they can't do anything with the materials they are reading. They've got to understand it at the most foundational surface level. And at this level, you are able to identify a lost student. So the tasks that we create, the assignments we develop, and to which we teach are all designed to ensure that students are reading and understanding, and if they're not, it prepares you to go in and remediate to ensure that they achieve that factual level of understanding. And these are important skills because there are skills you need to develop at this level that will become the foundation or the support for the higher order thinking skills. And by now, you should have your copy of Bloom's Taxonomy, and you might want to grab that, although I'm going to show you some parts of it in a couple slides from now. But you want to keep thinking about how we progress students along the continuum that is especially the revised Bloom's Taxonomy. So here are the skills you want to develop at this level. They're real simple. We want students to be able to describe, to recall, to relate facts, to show their understanding. We want them to compare and identify and summarize. And each of these is a skill you will have to ensure they know how to do and you might have to teach. So describing could involve cultivating their use of adjectives and adverbs. Recalling could be helping them learn how to annotate so they can locate important information. Relating facts is about expression. So is summary, one of the most important skills students need because that becomes part of their writing. But the ability to summarize is not innate, and you've got to teach it. So when we talk about factual response and we talk about the skills, we have to remember that these are the skills that we have to teach in order for us to fulfill all the levels of response and create a meaningful relationship between the student and the text. Now here's Bloom's revised taxonomy, where he talks about the cognitive dimension and the knowledge dimension. And we're talking about an increase of cognitive complexity, and we're talking about different types of knowledge. But you'll see that they both start far more at the surface, remembering, right, and attending to the concrete elements of what you're reading. And they move on to more creative or abstract ideas, as he uses here. So the addition in Bloom's taxonomy to creating as opposed to just synthesizing, that in the earliest version, synthesis was the highest skill, but now the ability to create is vital. And so you'll see that level 1 attends to this remembering in the cognitive dimension and the factual in the knowledge dimension. So let's take a look at this handout, and this is actually from the handout that I gave you, or I posted on Blackboard. And you'll see this is the revised taxonomy that starts with remember and moves to create. And if you look at it, you can actually see in the top line there, remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, create. Those are the words that are the language of the response model. And you'll see that, how'd you like that flying in arrow? Isn't that cool? Anyway, you'll see that these are the skills here under remember that we want to develop at level 1. The ability to recognize what they are reading, the ability to identify what's happening in the plot, the ability to recall facts or retrieve information. These are the lower order thinking skills that we're going to cultivate using the literature response model. And then here's the second one, the knowledge dimension. And you'll see the factual level involves knowledge of terminology and knowledge of detail and elements. See, another arrow. I'm very proud of that. So these are the skills that we are going to focus on at level 1. And level 1 doesn't just take place at the beginning of the text. We are constantly going back after each reading chunk and ensuring that they are making these cognitive and these knowledge-based connections with the text that they are reading. So let's look at some basic level 1 instructional options. And they're really very straightforward and they should be familiar to you, although we'll go through all of them. So we've got quizzes, quick writes, graphic organizers, focus or clarity statements, and the DoubleEntry Journal system. And quizzes are really interesting because people are like, oh, quizzes, they're punitive. Yeah, they are designed to ensure that students are reading. I'm not talking about complicated quizzes here. I'm talking about fact-based questions that ensure they're figuring out what's going on. And your job is to identify questions that will measure both their cognitive connection and their knowledge connection to the text. The key with quizzes is this. If you give a quiz, the questions in that quiz should be the heart of the discussion that follows. You never give a quiz, collect it, and then stop thinking about it. You're always using the quiz as a way to introduce discussion. And you're training students through your quiz questions how to read the text. One of the techniques that I use when I'm giving quizzes is to say, look, over the course of the semester, I'm going to give you 20 10-question quizzes. All you've got to do is accrue 100 quiz points to get an A. So it sort of takes the pressure off them as they're learning how to take quizzes for your class. See what I mean? And we'll talk more about that in class. The next is our quick write. And quick writes, hang on, I have an arrow coming. There it is. And quick writes are simply having students sit down and answer a question that is fact-based at the beginning of class. Or you can use an exit slip at the end of class. But it's just asking them to write a little bit in response to a factual question. And here's the key. I think we should have students writing in class every single day. And my way of teaching writing involves students writing every day and collecting those writings, and then every 3 or 4 weeks, we ask them to pull one out and turn it into a polished piece of writing. And quick writes are really great ways to give students opportunities to think about an idea that later could be fleshed out into a more coherent and fully developed writing activity. So quizzes and quick writes, easy peasy, you should be familiar with those. Now watch what's going to happen. Hang on. Did it flash? Those little things should have flashed. Anyway, the next 3 we're going to take a look at in a little bit more detail in subsequent slides, but I tried to make them blink. I'm not sure if that worked. I'm just learning the blinking technique. So let's start with graphic organizers. And there are some familiar ones that you should know. Graphic organizers are, tools that allow you to visualize and collect information in a way that is more than just reading blocks of prose or listening to my pointless ramblings. So here's a bunch of them that you can see. Now you can Google and find examples of almost all of these graphic organizers. So just keep an eye on them or collect them, and we'll go over some of them in class. But the big 4 that I'm going to talk about at this level are reading marks, character maps, action consequence maps, they're also called cause and effect maps, and story outlines. And I'm hoping you're familiar with most of those. So let's take a look at reading marks. Watch this. There we go. Now, bookmarks or reading marks are all over the internet, and you can find copies of them, and they're sort of cutesy things that are designed, to make students write on these little bookmark things, that you can use them as a bookmark, but you create your own. I'm a real fan of making my own, so I usually take a piece of paper and I fold it in half. I make a bookmark, those little things that are a couple of inches wide, and they're a little bit longer than the book, and so it's a thing that you can write on. And then I decide what kinds of things should go on the reading mark based on what we're focusing on in class. So for basic information, if you're reading War and Peace, or there's 10,000 names, you might want to list character names, or you could list character types. For example, who are the heroes, who are the villains, who are the round characters, who are the flat characters. You can put aspects of setting down. Does the setting change? Or what do you learn about the setting? Maybe pivotal plot moments. When do you think something has happened that is going to be important? Are there symbols if you want to teach students how to symbol hunt? Is there new vocabulary that students could use? Are there words that they like? What's their favorite word? Do they find it in the text? Or are there cool sentences that they think are really well crafted? You can see that the things that you can keep records of on your reading mark can be for lower skills or higher skills. That allows you to differentiate for your students. That allows you to say for your weaker students, your students who are learning or just learning how to read, or who are not skilled or who struggle, who are ELLs, they can start with smaller, more obvious elements of the text that they're going to record on their reading mark. Your stronger students can look for examples of ideology, can look for things about gender or class. So the point is, the reading mark is a really flexible tool, and you can use it as you see fit, and it becomes a tool for differentiating and modifying instruction. The next are character maps, and I love character maps. And one of my favorite things to do at the beginning of the semester is to do stick student. And that's where I do stick Jerry. I take this little figure you see here, and all around it I put the things that are of interest to me. Not school stuff, but other stuff. So students get a sense of who I am. Then I ask them to do it for themselves, so I get a sense of who they are. And I can think about that as I'm creating writing assignments, or making connections to literature, or working with students one-on-one. Well, they can also do stick character. They can begin to identify who a character is and what their traits are by creating this little figure and adding to it as the story progresses. It's a kind of silly, goofy thing, but it can be kind of fun, and I think students sort of like it. The next are action, consequence, or cause and effect maps. Now, I love this because I think students don't think that their actions have any effects. Or that there are no consequences to their choices. So this really talks about the kinds of choices that students make. And here's a simple graphic organizer that you can find online, and you can have students talk about an event. They can list the events on the left-hand side, and then they can come back and see what the effects were as the story progresses. As you'll see, a lot of these graphic organizers are things that they can use throughout the reading of a text. So they can pull it out and update it. That's a great kind of early class seat work while you get yourself organized. Hey, pull out your character map or your action consequence map and update it based on what we've been reading or what we've been talking about in class. And the last one that I'm going to talk about right now, I think for graphic organizers, I think this is my last one, yeah, is Freitags Pyramid. And you should be familiar with this from your literary study. If you're not, ask me about it. But it's the standard, five-act play, kind of walk you through it. Exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, resolution. And it's interesting because I think now we've got more like Freitags, like mountain range, so that we have multiple climaxes. I'm not even going to go there, but we have multiple moments that I think we can trace, and we can ask students to think about how the events of the drama or how the events of the novel play out. There's postmodern literature, a lot of contemporary literature, except for young adult, doesn't really follow this pattern in the way it used to. So those are the kinds of graphic organizers that you can use. Another thing we talked about on that list of level 1 activities were focus or clarity statements. And these ask students to sort of try and capture a character or a comment on the action in a single statement. It's trying to get them to narrow their ideas. Now with Twitter, they should be really cool at this. When I first started doing this in the 1990s, there was no such thing as Twitter. So getting students to be really concise was almost impossible. As hard as making me be concise. But anyway, it's the idea of trying to get students to focus and narrow and begin to make assertions that they have to defend. And that's why I talk about the because clause. So think about this. You're asking them to capture a character. Jim is superstitious because he thinks a hairball can predict the future. So we have a Jim being characterized, and we have evidence from the text. Scout and Jem taunt Boo because they don't think of him as human. And therefore we have a discussion of the action, the taunting of Boo, and the reason why they don't think of him as human. So you see that those kinds of focus or clarity statements can really let you know if the student is following, getting the facts of the story, and it's beginning to train them to offer specific evidence in support of their statements. Then we have the double entry system, right? The double entry journals, and you've all seen these. It's kind of note-taking system. And I think these are really effective as sort of a combined level 1, level 2 activity. So on the left side, students log their reading and the stuff that they think about as important and significant, sort of facts. They begin to record facts and quotations and details on that side. And then on the right side, they begin to interact with the text on a more personal level. So you see how you can use the same activity, the same graphic organizer to meet multiple levels. And again, that will become more clear to you as we work through the various levels. You can also offer them journal prompts for their double entry journal. And this is where you get students to explore aspects of the text that particularly appeal to them. So for example, you can have a journal prompt that asks students to summarize something. So summarize in your own words, your favorite part in what we read, and this builds their summary skills and their vocabulary skills, while also providing more focused direction that leads to a discussion of literary elements. So if you ask them to describe a character, you can then begin to say, well, this is what a round character is, and this is what a flat character is, a dynamic character and a static character. For struggling students, think about what we call STEM starters. So if you've got struggling readers or if you've got English language learners in your class, give them STEM starters. Something like, I'm not sure about fill in the blank. Or something I learned from this reading was fill in the blank. Or the setting of this story is fill in the blank. Or I'm confused about fill in the blank. Or I'm not sure why fill in the blank. Those kinds of STEM starters are really important to get students thinking. So for your solid students, a simple question will work. But for your struggling students, think STEM starters. And the double entry journal, the kind of example that we have here, doesn't even need any kind of prompt. It's simply go home and as you read, note down 2 facts, 1 quotation, and 3 details. The point with all of these activities and all of these tasks is they are focusing students on the facts, but each of them requires you to teach a particular set of skills in order for them to make that factual connection. These graphic organizers and these techniques do not free you from instruction. If I walk into a class and you say, hey, here's a stick thing, or here's a double entry journal, or here's a quiz, and you haven't taught them something, then you're an activities director and not a teacher. So every time you introduce one of these techniques, you've got to teach the skills that are required for students to perform what you are asking them to do. That's your direct instruction. So you say to yourself, I'm going to use Freitags Pyramid. That means I have to explain each of those elements. That means I have to illustrate each of those elements. That means I have to model how you assign those elements. That means I have to give them a chance to practice in a small group using those elements. It's not just, hey, here's Freitags Pyramid, fill it out. That's a failure on your part to teach. All right? So even factual level questions require you to be a good teacher. But it also provides students with the skills that you will see identified in the standards. And I don't want to get all Gallagher on you and say that you're teaching to the standards, but you're not. What you'll discover is what the standards are asking is just good teaching. All right, that's the end of level 1. I'm sure it's longer than you wanted to hear, but because you have pause, you can walk away from my annoying voice anytime you want. We'll take a look at level 2 next time.